Hey guys, I wanted to do a video for you guys on turbocharging, and I wanted to answer a lot of the questions I get, but I also want to help you guys be able to do it. I'd like to really see more people trying new things and expanding what is going on in the scooter and motorcycle world, because what we end up getting is a lot of the same thing and kind of boring. I love new stuff and I love new ideas, and I like looking at like what they do in Japan and like what they do in Taiwan, and it's exciting. And then I look around what's happening in the Philippines and not so exciting. So I want to answer some questions and hopefully we'll see some people doing some cool stuff. All right. So the first thing we'll do is, what are you going to need? These are the parts you're going to need. Some of them are optional, some of them are not, but this is everything you're going to need to run it. All right. So the first thing you're going to need is a turbo. What turbo? Any turbo. The smaller, the better. The smaller, now there's turbo mapping and stuff like that, and that's pretty complex, but majority of the time when you buy one, they'll rate them by power. So one will say 500 horsepower. That's too big. You're not going to put 500 horsepower on your bike and it's ever going to work. But like with like the GT15 or the VZ121 or what, like those are 50 to 100 horsepower. Now that's realistic. That's a size that's going to work kind of okay. You're not going to make that much power, but it's going to work for you. You're going to get 7 to 8 psi out of it, no problem. And that's any engine. It doesn't matter if it's a Wave, Mio, Raider, FZ15, R1. It doesn't matter as long as you meet the horsepower requirement. So if I have a turbo that says 100 horsepower and I have an R1 which makes 200 horsepower, that turbo is too small. So you need upsize. But for the underbone crowd, which is the majority of these people that this video is for scooters. So anything under 200 cc's, like a GT15 or a small car, like a K car, which is a 1.5 liter engine. It's small. You can use some of the parts off that and turbocharge. And people like Almo Motor in Malaysia, he produces snipers and raiders really effectively. They use car turbos. So it's been done, it's effective, it's possible. You just need a turbo. All right, number two, what you're going to need is a fuel pump. Now the size depends on the boost. If you're running a lot of boost, you need a big fuel pump. If you're not running a lot of boost, you can run a small fuel pump. The thing is when you run boost, that's pressure. And when you have fuel, you have to be above the pressure. You can't be too far above it, because what happens is you'll have a lot of trouble fueling. If you're running a carburetor, it'll flood it. If you're running EFI, you'll have a hard time mapping the fuel system to compensate for the fact that you're not regulating. It's just you have a lot of fuel and then you have the other fluid. It's difficult. So that brings us to our next thing, is fuel regulator. Now, fuel regulator takes reference from the boost, which is just a hose going to the intake, and it has a diaphragm in it, and it regulates the fuel pump to be above the boost. And what you want is that when you're at no boost, you have, let's say, 0 pressure, and you have 1 psi or 1 to 3 psi of fuel pressure going to the carburetor or fuel injection. So whatever it is, this is above it. And then as you add boost, they ramp up together. So that way, no matter what, your fueling is the same. So if you're jetting your carbs, it's consistent. You know what you need to change. Because what will happen is, if you don't have that, is if it at some point the pressure goes above the fuel pump, the air will actually push out of the carburetor and out of the fuel pump. It'll actually go back into the tank. And I've had that happen. When we didn't know the regulator wasn't working right, we all of a sudden got air shooting out the gas tank, and that's how you knew something was wrong. So those are the 3 most critical things. Those are the ones that no way around it. You have to have them to make it work. All right. The next thing is blow-off valve. Now that's optional. That's when you hear a bike or a car go by and they let off the throttle and you hear psh. That's the blow-off valve. And the purpose of that is to protect the turbine. When you close the throttle, all that pressure suddenly builds up, and that can damage the turbo, especially if you have a high pressure turbo. If you're running a lot of boost, that pressure will go back and cause the um, the fins on the turbo to possibly touch the housing, which would damage it. That's a problem. So a blow-off valve, besides sounding cool, protects the turbo. So while it's optional, I definitely recommend it. Fifth thing, intercooler. You don't have to have an intercooler depending on the boost level. If you're running low boost, it doesn't matter. It's not enough hot air to make a difference in your power, and you don't have to fight with that space to try and find somewhere to put it. So if you're running 5 psi and lower, or 8 psi lower, you're not really going to feel the effects of it. Will it add power? Yes. But if you just want to run a turbo, you don't need it. Once you start cranking up the boost, though, it's essential, because what ends up happening is that compressed air is extremely hot, and then your engine gets extremely hot from adding boost. So you have hot air, hot engine, and your fuel will pre-ignite. You'll have detonation, you'll have problems with tuning because the fuel isn't quite burning the way it should or when it should, and it won't run right. And when I did with the stock Raider, when we cranked above 8 psi, it started having a lot of problems. Even though I ran 100 octane fuel, it had a lot of problems. So the heat and the compression overwhelmed the gas. So that's number 5. Number 6, a scavenging pump. A lot of people you'll see use the engine oil from the bike to feed the turbo. Can you do it? Yes. Does it work? No. You'll always see them, they're always broken. They're always having trouble with them. They're always having to replace something and rebuild something. The reason is that our bikes, 200cc below, use very low PSI oil pump. It's all in volume. It's not PSI. It's like 5 liters a minute, like half a PSI, maybe. It's just not designed for it. The bikes don't need it, so they didn't build it. The problem is most turbos require like 25 PSI or more. And they'll say that if you look up at the manufacturer specifications, they'll say, hey, you need 15 PSI for this turbo, or 25 PSI for this turbo. Because what it does is that oil feeds the turbine, which floats between some bronze bearings. When it doesn't get good flow, when there isn't enough oil there, it starts to wear on those bearings, and eventually it'll damage the fins, and it's super expensive to repair. So the whole point of having a turbo is moot when you can't use it because it's broken. So what you get is what's called a scavenger pump or a primer pump, and it pumps oil straight to the turbo. And all it is it's like a little tiny fuel pump. You just tap it in, you can run it into the oil reserve of your bike or whatever like that, and just run it directly to the turbo so it feeds it. And it's simple and it's straightforward, and I don't know why more people haven't done it. They use it for there's a company out of Utah called Squires Turbo. They use what's called a remote turbo system, and the turbos are very far from the engine. And so the problem is oil doesn't get there. So they run a remote oil system that pumps oil to it and feeds it back to the engine. It works great. These guys have been doing it for over a decade, no problems. All right, and the 7th thing you need is called a peacock or an air nipple. And basically what it is between where the turbo is and the carburetor or EFI is, there's a nipple that will go into the intake to reference boost. Now that nipple will read boost for your gauge if you're going to use one, but more essentially it'll read boost for your fuel regulator. And that way, as that boosts up, your regulator instantaneously know, hey, we're getting more boost, you need more gas. And the more in line with the tubing it is, the quicker it will respond. So I have special tubing where it comes down and bends forward, so the air going in goes into the nipple to the reference, and it's instantaneous. Whereas if you do it in an angle opposite of it, it takes it longer to realize that, and so you'll have fueling issues. So diagram wise, I can do that later for you guys, but now you know what you need. So number 8 is a wastegate for the turbo. 90% of turbos have what's called a wastegate, and what that does is as the turbo spins up and it reaches the boost level that it's preset at, it'll open and close to keep it at whatever that is. Like the GT15 says 10 psi. So that means it's closed until 10 psi and then it starts to open. So it maintains 10 psi. Now you can adjust that. Some of them have nuts on it so you can make it tighter so you can go to 12 psi, whatever like that. So you can preset what you're running at or what it'll stop at. 90% of the time it has it, but if it doesn't have it, it's an essential item. So those are the 8 things you need. You need the turbo, you need a fuel pump, you need a fuel regulator, you need a blow-off valve, that's optional, but cool. Intercooler, optional, but cool. Oil scourging pump, I would call that critical if you want to drive for a long time and have the turbo work for a long time. An inlet peacock for the boost reference, and a wastegate. Those 8 things you have to have. And turbo, you're looking at, let's say, using what we know right now. We can buy a turbo for 7,000, 8,000 pesos. You got to figure in shipping. Fuel pump, I bought a high pressure fuel pump for 2,000 pesos, but you can get a cheap one for 600 if you're running low boost. A fuel regulator, you can get them off cars. If you know someone who runs a junk shop or something like that, you can find them off of a car and modify it. But if you wanted to buy one, you can get the clone ones for like 2,000 pesos. Intercooler, I bought one 2,000 pesos, cut it down for my size. Oil scourging pump, I believe is 1.5. This is all in pesos. And then a wastegate, about 2,000 pesos. But if you already have one on the turbo, you don't need one. So price-wise, that's what you're looking at. And then the time to build it. And you don't need some super secret squirrel guy to make it. Any mechanic that has a large range of tools and ability can make this stuff. All right, let's answer questions. What do we have? What will the turbo do? Turbo adds air. Your engine ingests whatever cc it says it is. That's how much air it ingests every time that it goes through the cycle. So a Raider 150 eats 150 cc's of air, and then that's why it's a 150 cc engine. That's the size. Now, when you use a turbo, you're adding more air, and depending on what boost you level or what boost you run, is how much more air goes in it. But let's say you run 8 psi. On average, 8 psi at 4% per psi is so if you're going to run 8 psi boost, that means that 4% per psi, that's 32% more power. So no matter what your engine is, that's 32% more power you're going to gain from adding boost. So whether you have a stock engine, a modified engine, or a bigger engine, or a race engine, it doesn't care. It's going to add 32% more at 8 psi boost. And as you add more boost, that's more power. Now, if you want to add more boost later, there's more you have to do to your engine to handle it, but I'm talking about stock engines. How much power will it get? Well, like I said, you get about 4% more power for every psi boost. And this compared to when you add compression, when you, let's say you skin your head and stuff like that, you gain 3%. So boost actually adds more power than raising the actual compression of the engine because it's more efficient to push air in and your engine can burn more air. Do I need to measure air temperatures at the intake? No, you don't. Not all the time. If you want to, when you first tune your engine and you want to make sure everything's cool or whatever temperature you want to run, then yes, get you one of those IR heat temperature guns and see where you're at. But your engine should be between 200 to 220 Fahrenheit, and then your intake's most likely going to be about 80 to 120, depending on how close the piping is from the turbo and if you're running an intercooler or not. Most of the time, mine runs around 80 degrees Fahrenheit from the piping to the intake. And then when the fuel sprays on it, it cools down much more. How do I cool the air? That would be the intercooler. Radiator for air, that'll cool the air down. Can turbos last a long time? if they're properly oiled. A turbo can last, well, you see turbos all around you all the time in trucks, buses, airplanes that use turboprops that have, those are all turbos. And the turbos can last a very long time if you take care of them. And taking care of them means make sure they got oil, good oil. So cycling, changing your oil regularly, making sure that they have oil all the time, enough pressure to spin them up. That'll keep them running for a long time. So you can take a long trip on it. It doesn't matter. Do I have to use EFI? No, you don't. I get that question a lot. Do I have to use electronic fuel injection like the new bikes? No, you don't. You can use a carburetor. How you do that on a carburetor is another video, but it's pretty straightforward and it's pretty simple. I ran the stock carburetor with 5 psi, no problem, and I've actually cranked it up to about 20 psi, and it makes it a little difficult to keep the hoses on, but it works. So you can use a stock carburetor. The thing is, you have to use, and this was another question, what kind of carburetor can I use if I use a carburetor? You need to use what's called a diaphragm type. And the diaphragm type is an enclosed unit like a stock Neo, stock Raider. And the reason you want that is if you have a flat slide, what ends up happening is there's all the gaps on the top. The air actually pushes up and out. So you could use that if you built a housing for it, but it's just fucking easier to use a stock carburetor for another bike, like a bigger bike or something like that. It's simple. It works. You can get parts for it. There's no reason to make it more complex than it really is. All right, that's all the questions, and that's everything you need to know in order to turbo your bike. So if you guys pick a subject that you want to hear about, or you want to know more about, or you want help on it, let me know. I'll do another video. Till then, take care.